Welcome to Heartbreak Chronicles. The laughter in the restaurant pierced Adrian's eardrums like daggers. The sauce from the spaghetti slid down his cheeks, and the acidity of the tomatoes seeped into his eyes, bringing a fiery sting. His eyes passed through the blurry red barrier and saw the contemptuous smile on his wife Gabriella's face. And their friends, those who had shared dinners and vacations, were now covering their mouths in giggles. And the man sitting next to his wife, Nico, was laughing unabashedly at the moment, his arm resting casually on the back of Gabriella's chair as if it were his rightful place. Adrian slowly wiped the sauce from his face with his napkin, his movements frighteningly calm. No one noticed the icy glint in his eyes or the slight upward curve of his thin lips. He was a scholar, a biochemist, a man accustomed to observing minute changes. And at the moment, he was watching the rise and fall of Nico's chest with every breath, watching Gabriella's shoulders shake with laughter, watching every sip of wine those friends took. "That's a shame," Adrian said calmly. "I had hoped to talk tonight." No one cared about his words. They were still reeling from the joke that Adrian, the quiet scientist, was naive enough to think that his wife was still faithful and in love with him. 2 minutes later, the first cough broke the laughter. Then came the second voice, the third. In the distance, the wail of sirens cut through the Boston night sky. Adrian stood in the doorway of the diner, watching the lights of the ambulance approach, but he knew it was too late. 6 months ago, spring was always late in Boston, but when it finally arrived, it was as if the whole city had been reborn. The energy of University City, the ripples of the Charles River, and even the air is filled with hope. Adrian Thorne stood looking out the window of his lab, the coffee in his hand long since cooled. Dawdling again? The voice of his co-worker Felicity brought him back to reality. "Let me guess, you're thinking about that new compound reaction again?" Adrian shook his head and smiled. "It's my 10th wedding anniversary." "Oh." Felicity's eyes widened in surprise. 10 years? God, I thought you and Gabby had only been married a couple years. You still look like newlyweds." Adrian laughed softly, because Gabby is always so young and pretty. "That's not a compliment. Gabriella has certainly maintained her enviable vigor and beauty. She's 4 years younger than Adrian, now 34, but still looks like she's in her 20s. With her olive skin and thick black hair, characteristic of her Italian heritage, and her dark brown eyes that always sparkle with energy, she is the center of attention wherever she goes." Unlike the outgoing Gabriella, Adrian is more introspective. As a principal investigator at the MassGen Medical Research Center, he spends much of his time buried between microscopes and data. The 42-year-old is tall and thin, and his dark brown hair has begun to show a hint of silver at his temples. But behind his steady gray eyes lies a keen sense of observation. "So, any special plans?" Felicity asked. Adrian looked at his watch. "I made a dinner reservation at Rosamarino's. Gabby's always wanted to go there." Rosamarino is Boston's newest Italian restaurant and has been gaining notoriety for its authentic Tuscan cuisine since it opened. Reservations usually need to be made months in advance, but Adrian knew the restaurant's owner, Thomas, a retired Army doctor who had been his senior in medical school. That night, Adrian left the lab early and went home to shower and change. Their home is a duplex in Back Bay, a 20-minute walk from the research center where Adrian works, and not far from Gabriella's small event planning company, Perfect Moments. It was purchased in their 3rd year of marriage and cost them almost all of their savings, but it was worth every penny. A spacious living room with floor-to-ceiling windows with views of the Charles River, 2 bedrooms, one of which has been converted into Adrian's home office. Adrian changes into a dark blue suit and sprays a little of the cologne Gabriella gave him last year. They don't have children, not because they don't want them, but because they still haven't succeeded after many attempts. For the first few years, each failure sent Gabriella into a brief depression, but as her career took off, the subject came up less and less frequently between them. At 6:30, Adrian began to worry. Gabriella usually comes home early to prepare for her appointments, but right now she's neither back nor sending messages. He picked up his cell phone and dialed her number. "Hi, honey." There was a hint of haste in Gabriella's voice on the other end of the line. "Where are you? Our appointment is at 7, remember?" "Oh my God," she exclaimed, "totally forgot. I'm still in the office. There's a problem with a client's campaign." Adrian felt a pang of loss. It's our anniversary. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. I know, I'm sorry. I'll be back as soon as I can, okay? Tell the restaurant we might be a little late. After hanging up, Adrian stood in front of the window, feeling an unaccountable uneasiness. Gabriella has been working a lot of overtime lately, and this isn't the first time she's forgotten about their appointment. He told himself it was only because her career was growing and needed more time and energy. Gabriella eventually arrived home in a hurry at 7:20, wearing delicate makeup and a new dress Adrian had never seen before, a deep red color with a flattering cut and a somewhat unexpectedly low neckline. New dress? Adrian asked, handing her a pre-mixed martini. Well, I bought it last week. She took the glass and took a light sip. For a meeting with an important client. She grabbed her handbag and walked towards the door. Let's go. Don't want to keep Thomas waiting too long. Rosmarino is even better than Adrian thought. The dining room is decorated in a warm Tuscan style with dim lighting, stone walls, and old oak tables and chairs. Thomas greeted them personally, leading them through the bustling main dining room to a quieter corner. The best seat in the house for my favorite scientist, Thomas said with a smile, and his beautiful wife. Gabriella smiled and thanked him, but Adrian noticed that her gaze kept sweeping to the other end of the restaurant. Anyone you know? He asked. Oh, no. She quickly replied. It's just that this place is so beautiful, and I was admiring the decor. Dinner went quite well. They chatted about how they first met at a medical charity dinner when Gabriella was an event assistant. Adrian talked about his latest research project, a treatment for an autoimmune disease, while Gabriella shared a couple of large corporate campaigns that her company has recently taken on. When dessert came up, Adrian removed a small box from the inside pocket of his suit and pushed it in front of Gabriella. 10 years, he said softly. Thanks for making my life complete. Gabriella opened the box, and inside was a platinum necklace with a sapphire pendant, her birthstone. Adrian. Her eyes moistened. This is so beautiful. She stood up, walked over to him, and leaned down to give him a hug. Just then, Adrian noticed a man was walking out from the direction of the kitchen, his eyes landing straight on Gabriella. The man was around his early 40s, tall and athletic, with dark hair combed back and dressed in a chef's uniform. His expression changed subtly when he saw Gabriella hugging Adrian. After dinner, Adrian offered to walk home for a rare warm evening. Gabriella agrees, but halfway through the walk, her cell phone rings. She glanced at the screen, a flicker of unease on her face. I have to take this, she said. It's an important client. She walked a few steps away to answer the phone, her voice lowered. Adrian could only hear a few staccato words. Can't. Not now. Tomorrow. I'll explain. When she came back, she was a little pale. Is everything okay? Adrian asked. Well, it's just some work stuff. She forced a smile. Can we speed things up? I suddenly feel a little tired. When she got home, Gabriella immediately went into the bathroom. Adrian heard the water in the shower and then her low sobs. He stood outside the bathroom door, debating whether or not to knock. Eventually, he chose to retreat to his bedroom and pretend he hadn't heard. That night, Gabriella slept with her back to him, separated by a noticeable distance. Adrian looked up at the ceiling, thinking. In their 10 years of marriage, they'd had their share of arguments and low points, but never had they felt so distant as they did now. He remembered the look in the man's eyes at the restaurant, Gabriella's mysterious phone call, and her new dress. A horrible thought formed in his mind, but he immediately suppressed it. Gabriella loved him, he never doubted that. Over the next few weeks, however, that suspicion began to grow. Gabriella is working more and more frequent overtime and often comes home late at night. Her cell phone has a new password and is no longer sitting on her desk as casually as it used to be. Whenever Adrian asked her about her schedule, she was always vague, claiming it was normal work stress. The change was so subtle that Adrian could almost convince himself it was just his illusion. Until one Tuesday afternoon, when he came home early with a migraine and found Gabriella's laptop forgotten on the coffee table with the screen still lit up. Adrian had no intention of peeking, but the title of the email on the screen caught his attention. About us. The sender is Nico Vizzelli. Hesitantly, Adrian clicked on the email. Dear Gabby, last night was incredible. Every time I'm with you, I feel like I've been reborn. I know things are complicated at the moment, but I can't stop thinking about you and longing for you. Thursday's appointment is confirmed, and I can't wait to see you again. Love you forever, Nico. Adrian felt a wave of vertigo. The email was dated 3 days ago, and the reference to last night was the night Gabriella claimed to have been working overtime for an important client. He continued to scroll down and realized it was just the latest in a series of emails. The earliest emails date back 2 months, and the content evolved from what started out as a professional discussion about the possibility of hosting a corporate event at Rosmarino to an ambiguously personal exchange. As it turns out, Nico Vizzelli is the chef and partner at Rosmarino, the man Adrian noticed at the restaurant. According to the emails, he and Gabriella initially met because she wanted to host an event at Rosmarino for a client. At some point, this professional relationship developed into a more intimate connection. Adrian shut down his computer and felt a sharp pain in his chest. He always thought he knew Gabriella and their marriage. Now it seems that it was all an illusion. He thought of his father, the man who had abandoned his family when he was 13 years old to run away with his secretary. At the time, he swore he would never repeat his mistakes, neither betraying his family as his father had done, nor breaking down after being betrayed as his mother had. Adrian didn't mention it that night. He pretends it's business as usual, having dinner with Gabriella and listening to her talk about the minutiae of her job. She mentioned that she needed to go to New York on Thursday to meet with an important client, possibly for one night. Adrian nodded his understanding and even offered to give her a ride to the station. No, she replied quickly. I'm going with the team. A special car has been arranged. Another lie. Adrian smiled and said, well then, good luck on your journey. Adrian took Thursday morning off. He tells Felicity she needs to take care of some personal business, which isn't exactly a lie. He followed Gabriella in his car and watched as, instead of heading toward the station, she drove directly to the area where Rosmarino was. The restaurant wasn't open at this hour, but Adrian saw Nico standing at the side door waiting. Gabriella got out of the car, and the two hugged and kissed before entering the restaurant together. Adrian stopped across the street and felt a strange calm. Now that he had confirmed the truth, there was no longer the torment of suspicion. He knew he should have felt angry, should have rushed in and questioned them, but all he felt was a deep sense of betrayal and the calm resolve that came with it. He gazed in the direction of the restaurant for another hour, as if hoping that by doing so he would be able to see through the solid walls and see what was going on inside. Eventually, he started the car and drove to the MassGen Medical Research Center. In the lab, Adrian devotes himself to his work, as if that will make him forget the fact that he has just discovered it. He is working on a new therapy for autoimmune diseases that involves the mechanism by which specific proteins respond in the body. Who would have thought that this knowledge of biochemical reactions would one day come in handy in a completely different way? That night, Gabriella went to New York, as she put it, and didn't come home. Adrian sat in his empty apartment, thinking about what to do next. Part of him wants to end the marriage immediately, but another part of him longs to understand why Gabriella betrayed him, to understand what went wrong in their marriage. He took out his cell phone and sent a message to Thomas asking him to have lunch the next day. If anyone knows anything about Nico, it's his oldest friend. The next day, Thomas meets Adrian at a cafe near the hospital. Seeing Adrian's haggard face, Thomas looks worried. What happened? You look like you haven't slept in days. Adrian asked bluntly. How well do you know Nico Vizzelli? Thomas's expression became subtle. Nico? He's an excellent cook from Florence, Italy. We worked together in New York, and when I decided to open this restaurant in Boston, I invited him to join as a partner. Is he married? Thomas hesitated. No. He was divorced once and had no children. What's up, Adrian? These questions. My wife is having an affair with him. Adrian said calmly, as if stating a scientific fact. Thomas's face turned pale. Are you sure? Adrian briefly described his findings. Thomas let out a long sigh as he listened. I'm sorry, Adrian. I really don't know. Nico has been. There are a lot of female friends, but I never thought he would have sex with a married woman, especially a friend's wife. Can you tell me more about him? For example, does he have any special habits, preferences, or allergies and such? Thomas frowned a little confused. Allergies? Well, he had a severe allergic reaction to some rare mushroom, chanterelles as I recall. We never use it on our menu, although it is popular in fine Italian cuisine. Also, he drinks a specific glass of red wine every day before a meal, saying it's to cleanse the palate. He paused. Adrian, what are you planning? Adrian forced a smile. Nothing, just trying to learn more about the man who stole my wife. Thomas didn't look convinced, but didn't press the issue. He patted Adrian on the shoulder. Whatever you decide to do, remember to think twice. Some mistakes can't be undone. Adrian nodded, but already had a vague plan in mind. As a biochemist, he has an in-depth knowledge of human reactions and chemicals. Chanterelle allergy is uncommon, but in severe cases it can lead to breathing difficulties and even death. It wasn't mere vengeance at work, but a cool calculation. If his marriage was dead, then the culprit shouldn't be alive either. Over the next few days, Adrian behaved as usual. He goes to work, comes home, cooks dinner, and discusses daily chores with Gabriella as if everything is normal. But beneath the outward calm, he began his preparations. First, he needed to confirm Gabriella's itinerary. Looking at her electronic calendar, her Google account, which she had forgotten to log out of, was a fatal error. He found that there was an event labeled Team Our Dinner the following Friday. Based on previous email exchanges, Adrian speculated that this was a party with Nico and others in Rosmarino. Secondly, he needs to acquire chanterelles. This mushroom is available in specialty markets, especially those that serve fine restaurants. Using his contacts in the medical research community, Adrian contacted a lab specializing in ingredient research to obtain a small sample under the guise of a study comparing the effects of different mushroom species on the immune system. Finally, he needed a way to introduce these mushrooms into Nico's system that wouldn't arouse suspicion. This is the trickiest part. Direct poisoning is too obvious and too risky. He needed a more covert method, one that would be difficult to trace even in hindsight. In the lab, Adrian began to study the properties of chanterelles. This mushroom contains specific proteins, and it is these proteins that trigger allergic reactions in some people. However, if these proteins are extracted and specially processed, they are virtually colorless and tasteless, yet still retain their sensitizing properties. A week later, on Wednesday, Adrian stumbled upon Gabriella, who was on her way out. "Are you free on Friday?" he asked, his tone casual. Gabriella was slightly nervous. "Friday? I have a work dinner about that big hotel event." "Where?" "Maybe I can pick you up later." In Rosmarino," she replied hesitantly. "But it will be late. You don't have to come." Adrian nods. "Actually, I was thinking, maybe I should join in." Seeing her surprised expression, he added, "I know about you and Nico, Gabby." Gabriella's face instantly turned pale. "Adrian, I can explain." "No need to explain," he said calmly. "I think we all need to be honest. I'll go to that dinner, and then we can decide what to do next. Perhaps, maybe our marriage can be saved, maybe it can't. But at least we should talk face to face, shouldn't we?" Gabriella looks both confused and guilty. "Aren't you angry?" Adrian smiled bitterly. "Of course I'm angry. But we've been together for 10 years, Gabby. We should at least try once to give each other a chance to explain." Eventually, Gabriella agreed. She would tell Nico that Adrian knew everything and wanted to join the Friday dinner to discuss the issue in a civilized manner. After she left, Adrian sat on the couch, feeling a strange sense of relief. The planning has begun. Now we just have to wait for the Last Supper. Friday night, Adrian made a point of wearing his best suit. He removed the prepared vials in a hidden corner of the apartment. They contained treated chanterelle extract. The colorless, transparent liquid looked nothing like water, but Adrian knew its power. Gabriella had left earlier in the day, saying she needed to meet the team ahead of time. Adrian took a cab to Rosmarino, his heart beating faster as the distance shortened. When he arrived, the restaurant was full, but there was a reserved area in the side hall, where he saw Gabriella and 6 others already seated. Nico, and a couple of men and women he didn't recognize, presumably members of the team, as Gabriella called them. The conversations around the table came to an abrupt halt as Adrian approached. Gabriella forced a smile and stood up. "Adrian, there you are." Nico stood up as well, with a complicated expression. "Adrian, it's nice to finally." Formal meeting. He held out his hand, and Adrian had to suppress his urge to avoid it. He shook the hand, noting that Nico's palm was slightly sweaty. "Thanks for inviting me on board," Adrian said, a hint of sarcasm in his voice. "What a interesting occasion." Gabriella quickly introduced the others, all employees or partners of her company, all apparently aware of her relationship with Nico, because they looked at Adrian with a mixture of embarrassment and curiosity. Adrian sat down, and the waiter immediately brought the menu and wine list. "Any special recommendations for tonight?" he asked. "Chef's special truffle mushroom pasta," the waiter replied enthusiastically, using precious black truffles flown in from France. "Sounds good," Adrian said with a smile. "I'd like to order that and a glass of your signature red wine." When the waiter left, the atmosphere at the table became more tense. Gabriella tries to ease the awkwardness by discussing the weather and recent sporting events, but with little success. "So," Adrian spoke up, and everyone's attention immediately focused on him. "How long have you two been together?" There was silence at the table. Nico cleared his throat. "Adrian, I understand how you feel." "You understand?" Adrian laughed softly. "Really? Do you understand what it's like to be betrayed by your wife? Being kept in the dark and being a laughing stock?" "Adrian, please don't." Gabriella pleaded. "Don't what? Don't expose you in public? Don't spoil this delightful dinner." Adrian's voice remained calm, but the anger in his eyes could no longer be hidden. "Maybe you should think about that before you cheat." The others at the table began to fidget. Nico took a deep breath. "Maybe we should talk somewhere else." "No," Adrian interrupted. "I want to talk right here. At your restaurant, in front of your friends. Haven't you all been whispering behind my back like this, secretly making fun of that foolish husband who was kept in the dark?" Just then the waiter returned with food and drinks. Sensing the tension, he quickly put down his plate and glass and hurried away. Adrian picked up his glass and gently shook the crimson liquid. "To honesty," he said sarcastically. No one responded to his toast. Adrian took a sip of his wine and then began to cut the plate of spaghetti. Aromatic, with the flavor of black truffles blending perfectly with the mushroom sauce. "You know," he said as he cut, "I always thought we were happily married. We've had our arguments, sure, but I never thought you'd betray me like this." Gabriella's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Adrian. Things just happen. Gradually we lost the passion between us, and Nico giving you what I can't." Adrian smiled, bringing a piece of pasta into his mouth. "What? Better sex? More attention? Or is it just because he's a chef and not a scientist who spends all day in a lab?" Nico's face turned red. "That's enough, Adrian. We can discuss this like adults instead of blaming each other." "Adults?" Adrian sneered. "A grown man doesn't steal his wife behind his friend's back." The atmosphere became more tense. Adrian continued to enjoy his dinner as if it was just an ordinary dining experience. The others began to reluctantly eat their respective foods, hoping that this awkward scene would end soon. Just then Gabriella sprang to her feet. "I've had enough of this passive aggression. Adrian, if you want a divorce, just say so. Don't humiliate us all like that." Her voice trembled with anger and her cheeks flushed with emotion. Adrian looked up at her and felt a strange calmness. "Humiliated?" he whispered. "You're talking about humiliation?" Gabriella suddenly grabs the spaghetti plate on the table and throws it at Adrian's face. Spaghetti and sauce instantly covered his face and suit. A surprised huff erupted around the table, followed by a few suppressed giggles. Nico couldn't help but burst out laughing at the sight, and the others relaxed as the laughter gradually spread. Adrian slowly wiped the sauce from his face with his napkin, his movements frighteningly calm. No one noticed the icy glint in his eyes or the slight upward curve of his thin lips. To a chorus of jeers, Adrian removed the vial from his pocket and, taking advantage of the action of wiping his face, quickly poured the liquid into the glass in front of Nico. Then he stood up. "I think I'm going to go to the restroom and clean up," he said calmly, his voice almost drowned out by laughter. "I'm sorry, I had hoped to talk tonight." No one cared about his words. They were still reeling from the joke that Adrian, the quiet scientist, was naive enough to think that his wife was still faithful and in love with him. As Adrian walked toward the restroom, he heard Nico say, "To new beginnings." This was followed by the sound of glasses clinking together. Adrian carefully cleans his face in the restroom, then looks at himself in the mirror. His eyes were surprisingly bright, as if they burned with some inner fire. He knew what would happen next. The chanterelle extract would quickly work its way through Nico's body, triggering a severe allergic reaction. He purposely chose this method because, even when examined after the fact, it can be difficult to link symptoms to poisoning, especially if the victim has a history of allergies themselves. As Adrian was about to walk out of the restroom, he heard the first cough from outside, followed by confused shouting. He took a deep breath and walked out. The restaurant was a mess. Nico collapses to the floor, grimacing, hands clutching his throat, obviously having trouble breathing. Gabriella knelt beside him, calling out his name in terror. The others stood or sat with shocked expressions. "What's wrong?" Adrian asked, feigning surprise. "I don't know," Gabriella cried. He suddenly couldn't breathe. "Did anyone call an ambulance?" "I've called it," said a waiter in a panic, "and it's on its way." Adrian stepped forward, pretending to help. "Does he have a history of allergies?" "Chanterelles," replied one of the kitchen staff, "but we never use it on our menu." "Maybe cross-contamination?" Adrian offered. "Or other allergens?" Just then Gabriella started coughing as well, and her face quickly turned pale. This was followed by a succession of similar symptoms in others at the table. Adrian watched it all, his expression gradually changing from concern to shock, but inside he was remarkably calm. In the distance, the wail of sirens cut through the Boston night sky. Adrian stood in the doorway of the diner, watching the lights of the ambulance approach, but he knew it was too late. Chanterelle extracts, especially specially treated samples in high concentrations, can trigger fatal allergic reactions in a very short time. What's more, he didn't just target Nico. By observing Gabriella's interactions with friends and social media photos over the days, he realized that several of her close friends often dined together and likely shared food, meaning that they, too, could have unknowingly ingested those extracts. When the first ambulance arrived, Nico was unconscious. Paramedics quickly entered the restaurant and began emergency treatment. More ambulances arrived in quick succession, and the outside of the restaurant was soon filled with emergency vehicles with flashing red and blue lights. "Step aside, sir," an officer said to Adrian. "Are you a member of the staff here?" "No," Adrian replied calmly. "I'm the husband of one of the guests. My wife is in there." The officer nodded and told him to step aside. Adrian watched the paramedics carry stretcher after stretcher out of the restaurant without a ripple in his heart. He knew he should have shown more anxiety, more concern, but at the moment he felt only a strange sense of satisfaction that justice, albeit in the most extreme way, had been done. Adrian stepped forward as the paramedics carried Gabriella out. Her lips had turned purple and she was breathing weakly. Seeing Adrian, she tries to say something, but can only make a weak sound of air. "Don't say anything." Adrian's voice was gentle as he held her hand. "The ambulance will take you to the hospital and everything will be fine." His eyes were filled with tears, but no one could tell if they were tears of sorrow or tears of relief. Gabriella was put in an ambulance and Adrian followed. In the bumpy car, he held his wife's hand and watched as the paramedics worked to stabilize her condition. He knew these efforts would likely be futile. The effects of chanterelle extract were too quick and deadly, especially for those who already had a history of allergies. When the ambulance arrived at the hospital, Gabriella's vital signs were very weak. Doctors and nurses quickly took her to the emergency room, and Adrian was asked to wait in the waiting area. A few hours later, a doctor approached him with a stony expression. Adrian knew what the next words were. "Mr. Thorne, I regret to inform you that your wife did not make it. We did our best, but the shock triggered by the allergic reaction caused irreversible damage to her organs." Adrian closed his eyes as tears slid down his cheeks. These tears are real, not for Gabriella's departure, but for the marriage they once had but which is now broken, for his lost trust and disillusioned love. "Where are the others?" he asked, choking back a sob. The doctor's expression became heavier. "So far, 3 people have died, including your wife. Others are in critical condition and are being treated in the intensive care unit." Adrian nodded, feeling a wave of vertigo. He knew this moment would come sooner or later, but it still shocked him to hear the news in person. 3 people died. 3 lives ended because of his revenge. "The police wish to speak to all those who were present," the doctor continued, "to learn the circumstances leading up to the tonight incident. They should be coming for you soon." Adrian nodded again. He already had his spiel ready. He left the table to go to the restroom to clean up the spaghetti sauce and came back to find that everyone had developed allergies. He knew nothing about Nico's allergy history or how the restaurant allowed allergenic substances to be mixed into the food. The perfect alibi, the perfect display of innocence. But as he sits alone in the hospital waiting area, surrounded by crying family members and rushing medical staff, Adrian feels guilt and fear for the first time. Did he really succeed? He got his revenge, but at what cost? 3 lives, maybe more, including the woman he once loved. He is now a murderer, whether the law can prove it or not. More importantly, can this revenge really heal the hurt in his heart? When the flames of anger are extinguished, all that remains is ash and nothingness. Adrian Thorne, once a respected scientist, is now a murderer with a hollow heart. The police came sooner than expected. 2 agents interviewed him in a small conference room at the hospital. Their questions were simple and direct. What did he see at the restaurant? What did he eat? Did he know anyone with a history of allergies? Why did he attend that dinner? Adrian answered all the questions as planned, acting both sad and confused. He mentions the marital problems with Gabriella, admitting that he knew about her relationship with Nico, but emphasizes that he went to the dinner in the hopes of resolving the issue peacefully. What about the spaghetti incident? One agent asked, "Why did your wife throw food in your face?" Adrian laughs bitterly. Our conversation became emotional. I may have said something that annoyed her. Then why aren't you angry? Why didn't you leave right away, instead of going to the restroom to clean up and come back? Adrian lowered his eyes. Because I love her. No matter what she did, no matter how much she humiliated me, I still loved her. I hope we can work things out and start over. The agents looked at each other and continued to take notes. They asked for more details, the layout of the restaurant, who sat where, who had symptoms first, and how they developed. Adrian answered in as much detail as he could, careful to maintain a balance between truth and lies. Finally, an agent asked, "Do you know what caused this allergic reaction?" Adrian shook his head. "I'm a biochemist, but my knowledge of allergy mechanisms is limited to the theoretical level. If someone had asked me, I would have guessed some sort of food contamination or cross-contact. But what exactly is? I really don't know." The agent locked eyes again, then nodded. "Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Thorne. We will contact you again if we have more questions. Please do not leave the city. We may need further statements." Adrian nodded in agreement. When he walked out of the hospital, it was dawn. Overnight, his world changed forever. Not only did he lose his wife, but he also lost a part of himself. The scientist who followed a code of ethics and respected life. In its place was a cold avenger, an empty shell that was dead inside. Over the next few days, Adrian mechanically took care of the necessary business, contacting funeral homes, preparing for Gabriella's funeral, responding to condolence calls from family and friends. At the same time, the news media was flooded with stories about Rosa Marino's tragic dinner, describing it as one of the worst food safety incidents in Boston's history. The death toll was finally set at 5, including Nico, Gabriella, and 3 of her friends. Investigators initially determined that cross-contamination in the restaurant's kitchen caused the fatal allergic reaction, but further investigation is ongoing. On the day of the funeral, the sky was overcast, as if it was also mourning for the deceased. Adrian stood by Gabriella's casket, receiving comfort from family and friends with just the right amount of sadness on his face. But deep down, all he felt was emptiness. The thrill of revenge had long since dissipated, leaving only eternal loneliness and guilt. Adrian was left alone at the cemetery after the funeral when the last guest also left. He looked at the newly erected tombstone with Gabriella's name and dates of birth and death. He used to think they would grow old together and face the ups and downs of life together. Now, it's all just a bubble. "I forgive you, Gabby," he whispered, "but I'm not sure I can forgive myself." Just then, Adrian heard footsteps coming from behind him. Turning around, he saw that it was 2 plainclothes detectives, the same 2 who had questioned him earlier at the hospital. "Mr. Thorne," one of them spoke up, "I'm sorry to bother you at this time, but we need you to come with us to the station." Adrian felt a chill spread throughout his body. "Is there a problem?" "We found some security footage in the restaurants. Interesting details. In addition, we detected high levels of chanterelle extract in Mr. Vizelli's glass, a substance unlikely to occur through ordinary food contamination." Adrian's face turned pale, but he tried to keep his composure. "What does this have to do with me?" The video shows a suspicious movement of your hand against Mr. Vizelli's wine glass as you wipe your face. Considering your professional background and knowledge of biochemistry, coupled with your wife's association with the deceased special relationship, we have reason to believe it was not an accident. Adrian didn't retort, just nodded in silence. In a way, he had seen this moment coming. Perfect crimes only exist in fiction. In the real world, every decision has consequences. Do I have the right to remain silent? He asked softly. The detective nodded. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used as evidence against you. You have the right to an attorney, and if you can't afford one, the court will appoint one for you. Adrian stopped listening to the remaining Miranda warnings. His thoughts had drifted far away, back to the charity dinner where he and Gabriella had first met, back to their first kiss on the banks of the Charles River, back to the laughter they'd had when they'd first moved into their new apartment. All those once fond memories are now clouded with bitterness. Adrian did not resist when the detective handcuffed him. He took one last look at Gabriella's headstone, then turned toward the police car. There are no winners in this story, just a mess of nothingness. Love, betrayal, revenge. This trilogy plays out in the most tragic way possible. All participants paid a terrible price, leaving behind only lessons and warnings. The damage of betrayal is like a ripple that, once started, has no control over where it will spread. And the flames of vengeance will not only burn the enemy, but will also reduce oneself to ashes. A dull ray of sunlight filtered through the barred windows of Boston's Eastern Penitentiary and reflected on Adrian Thorne's face. 2 years, 2 whole years from that fateful dinner to today. His hair had begun to mingle with gray, and his once sharp gray eyes had lost their former luster. Once a rising star in the biochemistry world, he is now nothing more than a prisoner serving time under prisoner number 20873, sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 5 counts of second-degree murder. The events of that night were quickly dubbed the Spaghetti Massacre by the media and became the most sensational criminal case in Boston in recent years. The prosecution had ironclad evidence. The restaurant's surveillance video clearly recorded Adrian pouring an unknown liquid into Nico's glass of wine as he wiped his face. Police found vials containing the remnants of chanterelle extracts in hidden corners of his apartment. And even more damningly, investigators tracked down the fact that Adrian had obtained samples of chanterelles from specialized laboratories under the research to obtain samples of chanterelles from a specialized lab. The trial was surprisingly short. Adrian refused to defend himself and pleaded guilty to all charges. His attorney tried to use temporary insanity as a mitigating circumstance. A husband who had a nervous breakdown after discovering his wife was cheating on him did something he wouldn't normally do in an extremely emotional state. But Adrian refused to cooperate with any psychiatric evaluation and simply stated the facts calmly in court. He discovered his wife's betrayal, plotted revenge, and executed the plan himself. Do you recognize that your actions will result in the deaths of multiple people? The judge asked. Yes, I recognize that, Adrian replied, his voice hollow, and I accept any consequences. The courtroom was filled with the families of the victims, their eyes filled with anger and grief. Adrian didn't avoid the stares, knowing that his behavior had caused irreparable damage. Not only Nico and Gabriella, but also the 3 innocent friends, whose only crime was to know about the affair and acquiesce in it. They had their own families, their own lives, and now it all ended with his revenge. Prison life wasn't as hard as Adrian expected. As a highly intellectual criminal, he was soon assigned to work in a library. His quietness and politeness earned him the favor of the guards, and his crime, a husband seeking revenge for his wife's betrayal, gains him a measure of respect among the other inmates. But inner peace is slow to come. Every late night, Adrian has flashbacks of that night. Gabriella's smile, the look in Nico's eyes, the plate of spaghetti that flew at his face, and then the creeping panic and agony, the sound of ambulance sirens, the blinding white light of the hospital corridors. The images haunted him like ghosts, refusing to leave. 2 years in captivity gave Adrian plenty of time to reflect on his behavior. He began to think, what would life be like now if instead of choosing revenge, he had chosen to divorce, to let go, to start over? Gabriella and Nico may get together, and they may or may not be happy. But at least 5 lives would not end there, and at least he himself would not be a prisoner, not only of the bars, but of his own guilt and remorse. Thorne, you have a visitor. The warden's voice interrupted Adrian's musings. This surprised Adrian. For 2 years, no one has come to visit him except his lawyer. His parents are long gone. He has no siblings, and former co-workers and friends have distanced themselves from him since the case broke. In the interview room, Adrian sees an unfamiliar middle-aged man in a proper suit with a serious demeanor. Adrian Thorne? The man stood up and held out his hand. I'm Robert Malone, Thomas Winter's attorney. Adrian frowned. Thomas? Thomas from Rosemarino? Yes, Malone nodded. It's a shame he couldn't come to see you in person. He's in a rehab center right now. Rehab? That night hit him hard. The restaurant closed, and he lost everything, including his health. Heart attack last winter. Adrian was silent for a moment. I'm sorry to hear that. He's a good man. Malone opened his briefcase and took out a letter. Thomas wanted me to give this to you personally. Adrian took the letter and opened it to read it. The letter was short, but each word seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. Adrian, I don't know how to start this letter. For 2 years, I've thought about that night and whether I was responsible. If I hadn't told you about Nico's allergy, if I had stopped you. But these ifs mean nothing. I'm writing to tell you that I forgive you. Not for you, but for myself. This anger and remorse almost killed me, literally. The doctor said if I wanted to live, I had to let go of the past. I hope you can forgive yourself too, Adrian. I know you're not a cruel man, just overwhelmed by anger and betrayal. We've all done things we regret, just to different degrees. Take care of yourself. Thomas. Adrian put the letter down and felt a long, overdue wave of emotion. Thomas's forgiveness, which he doesn't feel he deserves. But even more shocking to him is the fact that Thomas feels guilty about the role he may have played. This needless self-blame makes Adrian feel even more guilty. Is Thomas okay? Adrian asked, his voice shaking a little. Malone shrugged. Better. Doctors say his recovery is encouraging. Writing this letter was therapeutic for him. Adrian nods. Thank you for bringing this. Please tell Thomas. Tell him I appreciate it, and I hope he can really let it go. It's not his fault. Malone stood up. I'll pass it on. One more thing. Thomas wants you to know that Nico's family is back in Italy. They're also trying to move forward. The message fell like a stone into the lake of Adrian's calm heart. Nico's family. He never thought victims had families, parents, siblings, loved ones who once had high hopes. His revenge spreads like a ripple, hurting more people than he ever expected. When Malone leaves, Adrian is taken back to his cell. He sat on his humble bed, Thomas's letter still clutched in his hand. Forgive the word echoed in his mind. Thomas forgives him, but can he forgive himself? More importantly, can he forgive Gabriella? That night, Adrian had a dream. He dreamed he was standing in Rosemarino's kitchen, watching Nico prepare that fateful dinner. The dreamy Nico turned to him with a wry smile on his face. You know, Adrian, everyone has secrets. Gabriella has hers, I have mine, and you have yours. But secrets, once revealed, kill us like poison. Adrian woke up in a cold sweat. It was just after dawn, and the cell was filled with the snores of the other prisoners. He sat up and rubbed his temples. Nico's words in the dream made him uneasy. Yes, everyone has secrets, but not every secret leads to death. It was he himself who chose the most extreme way to deal with the betrayal, who turned the secret into poison. Over the next few weeks, Adrian began keeping a journal of his thoughts and reflections. It's not meant for anyone to read, just to clear their minds, to try to understand their behavior and motivations. I've always considered myself a victim, he wrote, betrayed by my wife and laughed at by my friends. But now I realize that the real victims were the 5 people who lost their lives because of my selfishness and revenge. I deprived them of the opportunity to right their wrongs and change their lives, just like the kind of opportunity one had hoped for. Over time, Adrian's journal gradually shifts from self-reflection to broader reflections on love, betrayal, forgiveness, and human frailty. He began reading books on philosophy and psychology in an attempt to understand the complexity of human behavior. After 3 years of incarceration time had passed, Adrian was transferred to a lower security facility. As a result of his good behavior, he was granted additional privileges, including the opportunity to participate in prison education programs. He began teaching basic science courses to help inmates who wished to earn their high school equivalency. Teaching gave him a new sense of purpose, a way to redeem himself, even if it was only a modest beginning. Just when Adrian thought his life was set in stone, an unexpected letter changes everything once again. The letter was sent from France and addressed to E. Vazelli. Adrian's hand trembled slightly as he opened the letter. Vazelli, a surname that was full of guilt for him. He guessed it could be Nico's family, perhaps coming to express anger or a curse. But the letter was unexpected. Mr. Thorne, I'm Elisa Vazelli, Nico's sister. Writing this letter was not easy for me, but I believe it was necessary for my own inner peace. First of all, I want you to know that I don't hate you. At first, of course, I hated it. When I learned of my brother's death, when I heard that you had planned it all, that anger almost consumed me. But as time passed, I began to think about the reasons behind the whole thing. Nico has always had a bad habit of messing with married women. Ever since he was a child, he has always sought the thrill of the forbidden, the pleasure of stealing someone else's love. Our parents were divorced, and that probably affected him in some way. But that's not an excuse, it's an explanation. I am not contacting you to seek further harm or revenge. In fact, quite the opposite. I want to tell you that I forgive you. Not because your behavior is right. It certainly isn't. But because I believe that everyone has the opportunity to be forgiven, even those who have committed the unforgivable sin. I settled in France and live with my husband and 2 children. Every time I look at the kids, I think of Nico and the childhood we shared and the life he could have had. But I also think of you and imagine your time in prison and the weight of that guilt. I would like to correspond with you if you wish. Not to open the scars, but to understand, to somehow reconcile. Maybe through communication, we can all find some inner peace. Sincerely, Elisa Vazelli. Adrian read the letter and tears ran uncontrollably down his cheeks. Elisa's forgiveness shocked and shamed him. He killed her brother, and she offered forgiveness and understanding. This selfless compassion made him feel even smaller. He spent a couple days thinking about how to respond. Eventually, he wrote an honest and painful reply. Ms. Elisa, I was surprised and humbled to receive your letter. Your forgiving heart is far more than I ever imagined or deserved. I don't know how to express my remorse and apology. I'm sorry is too light a word to carry the weight of the hurt I've caused. I took your brother's life, took the lives of 4 other people, and caused irreparable damage. There is no reason or excuse to justify this. You mentioned Nico's past and habits, but that doesn't excuse my behavior. Everyone has a choice, and I chose the darkest path. I could have chosen to leave, to let go, to forgive, but I didn't. Now I have to live with the consequences of that choice. Your willingness to correspond with me is a kindness I do not deserve. If this brings you some measure of peace or understanding, I would be happy to continue this exchange. But please don't force yourself out of duty or sympathy. I think about my behavior every day, about every moment of that night, about what it would be like now if I had made different choices. These reflections won't change the past, but perhaps they will help me understand myself and the fragility and dark side of humanity. Thank you again for your letter and your forgiving heart. Sincerely, Adrian Thorne. From there, Adrian and Elisa began a regular correspondence. They talk about a variety of topics, from Nico's childhood to Adrian's research, from life in France to everyday life in prison. This exchange is healing for both parties, a way to understand each other and themselves. Through his correspondence with Elisa, Adrian begins to see Nico as more than just a wife's lover, but as a complex individual with his own story, a child who loves to cook, a brother who is proud of his family, and a man with his own dreams and struggles. Similarly, Elisa begins to see Adrian as more than just the brother's killer, but as a man lost in jealousy and betrayal, a soul paying the price for his actions and struggling to find redemption. One day, 5 years later, Adrian received a special letter. Not from Elisa, but from the Boston DA's office. The letter informed him that, due to new evidence and changed circumstances, his case would be re-examined and a reduction in sentence might be considered. New evidence. Adrian muttered to himself in confusion. He confessed, the evidence is overwhelming. What could possibly change? The answer is revealed at a hearing a week from now. Adrian is brought into the courtroom and sees familiar faces he hasn't seen in years. Though looking much older, his hair almost completely white. Elisa, a friend of the correspondents he's only seen in photographs, and several family members of the victims, whose eyes are no longer filled with anger, but with a complicated calm. What shocked Adrian the most was that Gabriella's parents were present. Antonio and Maria Rossi sat in the front row, looking serious but no longer hateful. During the trial 5 years ago, Antonio had openly expressed his desire for Adrian to be sentenced to death. Maria, on the other hand, broke down in the courtroom and had to be helped out. At the beginning of the hearing, the prosecutor explained the reasons for the re-examination, based on the collective petition of the victim's family. Together with the defendant's behavior in prison and his apparent remorse, we believe that a reduced sentence can be considered. In addition, we have received new information suggesting that the defendant's actions may have been a temporary lapse in judgment made under extreme emotional stress rather than a premeditated murder. Adrian frowned. He knew it wasn't true. His behavior was completely deliberate and carefully planned. But why would the prosecutor say that? Next, several family members of the victims came forward to speak, including Elisa. She recounts how correspondence with Adrian helped her understand the complexity of the whole thing and how it allowed her to find the strength to forgive. "I'm not saying that his behavior is excusable," she said, "but I do believe that he has received the punishment he deserves and that he is trying to atone for his sins. Continuing to keep him in prison will not bring my brother back to life, nor will it bring more comfort to anyone." Finally, and surprisingly, Antonio Rossi stepped forward. The once angry father now looked tired and calm. "5 years ago, I hated this man more than anyone else in the world." His voice was hoarse. "He killed my daughter, my only child. But as time passed, I began to think about the roots of this tragedy. My daughter made bad choices and betrayed her marriage vows. This man," he pointed to Adrian, "also made the wrong choice to retaliate in the most extreme way possible. We are all part of this tragedy and are all responsible." He paused and took a deep breath. "I can't say I've completely forgiven him, but I no longer want him to spend the rest of his life in prison. If he could have redeemed himself in some other way, maybe this tragedy could have had some positive impact." At the end of the hearing, the judge announced that a decision would be made within a week. Adrian returned to his cell with mixed emotions. He wondered if he should accept this possible forgiveness. Does he really deserve a reduced sentence? Is it really possible to redeem yourself? A week later, the judge ruled that Adrian's sentence was reduced from life to 25 years and that he would be eligible to apply for parole after serving 15 years. Considering that he has already served 5 years of his sentence, this means that in another 10 years, he could potentially regain his freedom. This decision has caused some controversy in the community. Some see this as disrespectful to the victims, while others see it as an expression of the humanitarian spirit of the justice system. But for Adrian, the most important significance of the ruling is not the possibility of early release from prison, but the hope of redemption it represents, that his efforts at repentance and atonement have been recognized, and that he has the opportunity to pay for his sins in other ways. After the ruling, Adrian had a chance to talk briefly with the people who had come to the sidewalk. Elisa gave him a gentle hug, Thomas shook his hand, and even Antonio nodded in greeting. These tiny gestures mean a lot to Adrian. They symbolize a degree of reconciliation even though the hurt will never fully go away. Back in prison, Adrian begins to think about his future. If he does get parole in 10 years, what is he going to do? He has lost his professional career, his reputation, and even his ability to live a normal life. But perhaps he can find a way to use his story and experience to help others and prevent a similar tragedy from happening again. He began giving mini lectures at the prison to talk about anger management and impulse control. He shares his experiences with other inmates who have committed crimes on the spur of the moment, warning them that revenge will only bring more pain. These activities are gradually gaining importance, and even psychologists are coming to observe and study them. 7 years later, Adrian was allowed to participate in a special community service project, going into schools and telling young people his story to warn them of the dangers of impulsive and vindictive behavior. Although each telling evokes painful memories, Adrian perseveres in the hope that his experience will be a lesson for others. "I used to think revenge would heal the wounds of betrayal," he told the young faces, "but I was wrong. Revenge only creates bigger wounds, not only for others, but also for yourself." True healing comes from understanding, forgiveness, and letting go. These words are not only for students, but also for myself. Through one narrative, Adrian begins to come to terms with his past and his complex identity as both a victimizer and a victim. He no longer tries to justify his behavior, but is open to its wrongs and consequences. 10 years passed, and Adrian's parole hearing was held as scheduled. With the support of Elisa, Thomas, and several educators who had heard him speak, he was granted parole. In the spring of 2035, on a day strikingly similar to the day he went to prison, Adrian Thorne stepped through the prison gates and became a free man again. But freedom brings not only joy, but fear and uncertainty. The world out there has changed, and he is no longer the successful scientist he was 15 years ago. Now he's a middle-aged man with a criminal record who needs to start everything over. With Elisa's help, Adrian found a job outside of Boston, working as a counselor at a youth counseling center for young people with violent tendencies or emotional management issues. His experiences and stories became powerful educational tools, and his professional background allowed him to explain the mechanisms of anger and impulsive behavior from a scientific perspective. Life is getting on track, but Adrian never forgets his past. Every year, he traveled to the cemetery on the day of that fateful night to lay flowers in honor of the 5 deceased and silently ask for forgiveness. He knows that this atonement will last a lifetime and knows that some wounds will never fully heal. In his 3rd year of freedom, Adrian receives a special invitation from Thomas for the opening of his restaurant. After his recovery, Thomas decided to make a fresh start by opening a small family restaurant, away from the extravagance and ambition of his past. A handwritten note was attached to the invitation. Adrian, new beginnings are always full of possibilities. Mine, yours, everyone's. I hope you'll come. Thomas. Adrian hesitated for a long time. Returning to a restaurant setting, especially one associated with Thomas, brings back too many painful memories. But in the end, he decided to face the challenge, just as he had faced every challenge in the past few years. On opening night, Adrian arrived in a simple but decent suit with a bottle of non-alcoholic beverage as a gift. The dining room is small, but cozy and comfortable, a far cry from the opulence of Rosmarino. Thomas greeted him personally, and the two men embraced briefly. "Thanks for coming," Thomas said, genuine gratitude in his voice. "Thanks for inviting me," Adrian responded. "This place. It's cozy. That's all I want right now," Thomas smiles. No pressure, no big stars, just food and friendship. The evening went surprisingly well. Adrian meets several of Thomas's old friends and even a family member or two of the victims. The atmosphere was a bit heavy, but it also carried a unique warmth of shared experience and understanding. As dinner drew to a close, Thomas asked everyone to be quiet for a moment. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he said, raising a glass of water. "It's not just the opening of a new restaurant. It's the beginning of a new life for all of us. The pain of the past can't be erased, but we can choose how to live with it and how to let it shape us rather than define us." His gaze swept over everyone in the room and finally landed on Adrian. "We've all made mistakes. We've all had regrets. We've all hurt others or been hurt by others. But tonight, we choose to forgive. We choose to understand. We choose to move on." Adrian felt a lump in his throat. Thomas's words touched something deep inside him, something long buried by guilt and self-loathing, a longing for reconciliation and redemption. After the meal, Adrian walked over to Thomas. "Thank you, not just for tonight, but for everything." Thomas patted him on the shoulder. "We're all learning how to move on with our lives, Adrian. It's not easy, but it's possible." As he left the restaurant, Adrian looked up at the Boston night sky. The stars are shining, the moon is high, the world still works, and life goes on. He took a deep breath and felt a peace that had been missing for a long time. Revenge brought no satisfaction, only more suffering. But in the midst of those dark ashes, a spark of hope flickers, the hope of understanding, the hope of forgiveness, the hope of new life. Adrian knows that he will never be able to fully atone for the mistakes of the past or bring the dead back to life. But he can choose how to spend the rest of his life, whether to wallow in guilt and remorse or to do his best to make his experience a cautionary tale for others, so that this tragedy can have at least some positive impact. "I'll take the latter," he whispered to himself. then turned in the direction of his home, each step more determined. That night of spaghetti and death changed the course of his life forever, but it wouldn't define who he was forever. After a whirlwind of betrayal and vengeance, Adrian Thorne found a difficult but rewarding path to warn others through his own experiences and to influence them with his own repentance as a permanent reminder of those 5 lost lives. It's not a perfect ending, not even a happy one, but it is a true ending, an ending about the fragility and complexity of human nature, a timeless lesson about betrayal, revenge, and redemption. In this lesson lies the simplest yet most difficult truth to practice. True strength lies not in retaliation, but in the ability to face the hurt, choose to forgive, and then move on. It took a lifetime for Adrian to finally understand this power. That's the end of today's story. For more captivating tales, hit subscribe and never miss an episode.